All right, here we are in Brooklyn. We just talked. We decided we haven't been to this neighborhood we haven't been to Brooklyn, period, since we worked for the Salt Lake Olympics, or right after that. We came
Right.
here in 2003-ish.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Over 20 years ago.
And actually, we stayed over closer to Brooklyn Heights and hung out over there. But anyway, the reason we're here is because this is the neighborhood that I used to live when I lived in Brooklyn with Bill and Jill and Mark. We're on South Oxford Street here in Brooklyn, not far from Fort Greene Park, which is down about a block and a half. And we're gonna actually walk down there and take a look. We just got off the subway here, and I kind of wanted to see what this part of the neighborhood looked like. It's amazing that I mean, when I lived here almost 40 years ago, I wouldn't come down on this block right here. It just was dark and dangerous and depressing and all. And now it just looks fantastic. And the same all the way down there. That's Fulton Street down there. So anyway, if you go to Fulton and hang a left, it takes you to downtown Brooklyn. It takes you actually to another old haunt we used to hang sometimes called Junior's Cheesecake, which is down that way.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's gotten pretty
Yeah.
famous. Back then, I think there was just the one, and it was
Uh-huh.
right here. Anyway, we're going to get down to the next block, the block that I lived on between DeKalb and Flatbush, Lafayette, and we're going to go down and have a look at the old houses. So let's follow me. We're going to go check it out. Well, while we're waiting, this second place I lived here on Oxford, which is right a few buildings down on the right. The closest little grocery store, like you needed staples, like milk, eggs, whatever. There was the dude down here. I think it was Jordanian. You can't even see it now. It's underneath that scaffolding. You go in there, and the guy was open 24/7, and he was funny as hell because he was probably in his 50s. The dude was so paranoid about humankind that he was petrified. I mean, the guy had more iron and fencing and gates and shit around his thing. And I swear to God, if you added up the total of everything he had in that store, it probably wasn't worth $1,000. But anyway, he was crazy. And I'm sure he had 3 or 4 guns under the counter. So consequently, I was petrified to go in there and get a dozen eggs.
Right.
But sometimes I had to. So anyway, that was the... so let's go down here. This building right here, I just forgot. Only just now I remembered. There's a story about this building right here on the corner, which I will tell you in a minute. But
Okay.
let's go look at the other building first. And there it is.
61.
61 South Oxford Street. It really looks pretty much just like it did back in the day.
Wow. What a great building though.
Oh, it was just absolutely fantastic. So the deal here, it looks like some guys in there. Oh no, he's working. I thought he was playing piano. Yeah, these buildings have all been improved. I mean, it was really nice back. This actually was considered a pretty nice street, a desirable street. There were a few writers that lived here. There was a playwright whose name, he was hot at the time in the 70s and 80s. Not David Rabe, but another guy that was equally well known. Anyway, he lived about 3 doors down that way. But yeah, that's the kind of neighborhood it was. It was pretty cool. So Fort Greene is down at the end there. We are going to go down that way. So Bill and Jill, so the story is that my roommates when I lived in Palatka at the School of the Arts, Mark Harlow and Bill Klein, right after they graduated in June of '79, they moved to New York City. And they both lived in different places for a couple of months, and then they finally found a place down here on the corner. I think it's number 2 South Oxford, right on the corner, and it was a great little spot. And so they moved in together. So they were together again. And so I graduated a year later and ended up, after a short stint in Miami, ended up living in Boston with another schoolmate of mine, Phil Patrone. And I would come down here, and I was trying to be an actor, and so I would audition. I wanted to come down and audition and do like a week or 2 of auditions at one run. And so every time I would do that, I'd stay with them at the place there. Never got anything significant. Nothing ever came of that career, but that's kind of where I started. Then later, Mark Harlow split off. This was probably 2 years later. He split off and moved to Seattle. And Bill, who had started dating Jill Auerbach at the time, they decided to shack up, and they found this place here, and they moved here. And they'd been here, I think, about a year and a half when I came up and moved with them in '86. So I lived with them for not even a year. I lived with them here. And the cool thing was, they started out basically just having the 3rd and 4th floor. And then over time, the landlady gave them the ground floor. So they basically had 3 floors in this place. And I stayed actually in the attic, which is another space that they acquired.
But you can't see from here.
You can't really see it from here. So anyway, but that's where I lived. So this was my last known address in Brooklyn, where I lived in. I was here in 1986 and 87. I left in 87. I would have stayed, but I got a call to go work down at the U.S. Olympic Festival, which was happening in North Carolina, and it sounded really exciting, so I moved back to go work that, and I went off into that career path. So anyway, let me tell you the story about the place on the corner I was going to mention.
Yeah.
So one winter night, I'm up there. Remember, I'm sleeping in the attic. It was a really nice attic. I mean, it was a huge attic. That room was it was like a suite in a hotel. So it was like 350 square feet. So I'm up in the attic, and I hear Jill hollering like 3 in the morning. And Bill and Jill she didn't holler, and Bill and Jill never fought. So I thought, what in the hell is going on here? And so I hear she all of a sudden, like 3 seconds later, she says, "Joedy, let's get out." So I'm like, "What's going on?" She said, "The building next door is on fire."
Oh,
I said,
God.
"Oh shit." So I'm like, I got like, it's dead of winter, but I got like thin pajamas on, like short shorts and a thin little raggedy t-shirt. And I'm like, so I get
Similar to your Coke t-shirt that you have now?
pretty much, yeah. So I sprinted down the steps, and I got all the way down to the ground floor, and I said, "Oh, damn, I can't go out. It's like 25 degrees out there," because it was a dead of winter. It was like January, February.
Ooh.
So I'm like, "Oh, I got to go back up." Well, you could smell this. You started to smell the smoke, and everybody was hollering. The landlady and her husband in the basement were screaming because they had mobility issues. They were slow, and Bill and Jill, and they had a cat and a dog. So they're trying to round all that stuff up, and I'm trying to help them. Anyway, and we're panicking because we're thinking, damn, it's like, what if the gas line blows here? So it was like a crazy scene. So I ran up and I got the heaviest jacket that I could. I didn't have time to look for pants. I probably did have time. In fact, I did have time now in hindsight, but I didn't know that. So I just ran back out, and we're all out on the street, like right over here, like 45, 50 people standing here. Starts out 1 fire truck. Next thing you know, there's like 8 fire trucks. And it turns out this whole block from that corner building, which was the beginning of it, the one that I pointed out earlier, that caught on fire. And then it spread through the ceiling and the roof down this way. So when we got out and we were looking, we could actually see the gable at the very top of our building on fire.
Wow.
So basically right above where I was sleeping had caught on fire.
My God.
And so, the damn downside of it was we were out here for, I want to say an hour and a half. And we kind of knew some of the neighbors, but not well enough. But we started to worry, like, well, where are we going to go? We can't get back in our apartment, our building. But lo and behold, the fire people, after that hour and a half, said, you guys are clear. You can go back in your buildings. I would stay away from the top in case, something happens again. But we've checked it. Oh, and by the way, we've turned off the gas lines. So we're going to come back tomorrow in the daytime and double check everything before we turn them back on. So you don't have gas, which means you don't have heat for the next 3, 4, 5 hours. So that was the situation. Anyway, we decided, what the hell, let's go back in, and we just slept right here on the ground. This was like a living room / library. There was nothing, but we were so tired, we just all fell asleep on the rug. It was like an Asian rug, and we fell asleep on that, and that was that night.
That is crazy.
That was crazy. Yeah, that was nice. So that was life here on 660. I loved living with Bill and Jill. I just loved them so much. They were fantastic, and I got along with Bill really, really well. And so that was here, and then I moved back to North Carolina, and I rarely came back up to see him. And every time we did, we always went down here to DeKalb and took a right and went down about 3 blocks. There was one of the best Italian restaurants I've ever known, and it was called Chino's. It was spelled Cino, C-I-N-O,
Right.
but it was pronounced Chino's, and it was a little place, and they knew Bill and Jill, and it was an old family, one of these families where it was started by the grandfather or the great-grandfather decades ago, and the family just continued to run it. So when you went in there, it was all family.
Do we
So it
think
was
it's still there?
no, because you and I went there.
Did
we
we?
walked down that way when
Okay.
we were here 20 years ago, and it wasn't there.
Okay.
So and
Oh, I vaguely remember that.
yeah. Because if it had been, we would have gone to dinner.
Right.
The food was, simple but so good Italian food, and not that big. I mean, it only sat maybe 30 or 40 people in there. I want to say they had maybe 8 or 9 tables, but anyway, great little Italian joint. But we're going to walk down to the end of the block because I want to show you the first place where Mark and Bill lived before they split and those guys moved here. So let's go down to that end of the block.
Okay.
Yes, it turns out I had a better memory than I believe I have. It was, in fact, number 2, South Oxford. And that's where Bill and Mark lived. They lived in that corner apartment. So basically, these first 3 windows on the 2nd floor, right there.
Yep.
And they had basically half of that building. So their apartment, it wasn't huge, but it certainly wasn't tiny. It wasn't a studio. It was basically a 2-bedroom apartment. So when I would come here for sometimes a long weekend or, what I would do is when I was in Boston, quite often, Phil and I would come down just to see a show. And we would come down and stay with these guys for 2 or 3 nights. Or, like I said,
It was big enough for all 4 of you to be
well,
in?
what we would do is they had a
Sofa?
pull-out sofa, uncomfortable as hell, but for a few nights it was okay. And then they had a blow-up mattress, so we basically took over the place, but they didn't care. But anyway, so we were there, and they did not live there that long, but it was actually a pretty charming little apartment. They knew all the other tenants in the building, and we had a good time. Now, here's the thing that was super cool. Fort Greene, such a great little park. It's so much nicer now than it used to be, but you could tell it's one of these grand New York / Brooklyn parks. It's huge, and it's just got so much going on. But we used to, in the dead of winter, that was a great park to go sledding.
Wow.
So we would go over there and we'd take our Mark and Bill had those cheap little trash can lid type sleds. I forget what they were called.
Yeah.
But we go up. You can see the hill up there up on the thing. So you'd start there. Now, if you were going in the other direction over toward that street over there, there was like a little slope at the end where if you got up enough speed, you'd pop right off over the wall and onto the street or the sidewalk.
Wow.
So we used to do that. That was pretty fun. But I got another story about that park that's pretty interesting. So, this is when we lived at 61. So there was a writer, actually Bill met him first, and then I came to know him pretty well as well. There was a writer that had some renown named Edward Bunker. We called him Eddie Bunker. And Bill met him in a bar, actually right down, around the corner. Now he had a really fascinating story. The dude was a career criminal. And when we met him, he was probably close to 60. He might have been in his 60s. And he'd gotten out and he'd been out for 10 years. He lived over in Brooklyn Heights. Turns out he had a really nice apartment, sub-ground level. He and his girlfriend, they've been together for 10 or 12 years. They lived there, and he was cool as hell. One of his books that he wrote, I cannot remember the name of it right. Oh, I think it was called No Beast So Fierce, was turned into a movie called Straight Time, starring Dustin Hoffman. Now, this was in I want to say the late 70s, maybe, 78, 79. So, he kind of was making money writing. And I read all of his stuff, and I was fascinated by it. I thought it was good. He's a harsh guy. He's tough, sort of Charles Bukowski meets, I don't know who. I don't know. But anyway, what a character this guy was. And he was a big guy. He was like 6'3". He was probably a good 250. He was like a football, So this guy didn't take any shit from anybody. So we're out walking around. Oh, and he liked to smoke joints. Now, these days you can walk anywhere and smoke a joint. It's legal. Back in the day, you could get busted for having...
In fact, we smelled it the whole walk over.
Oh, I know, and it was on the subway train.
Yeah.
But anyway, back in the early 1980s, you weren't supposed to have marijuana, you could get busted. But, most cops kind of ignored it even back then. If you were just smoking a joint, they didn't really care. So, we're over here in the park one day. Me and Bill and Ed and another guy, I can't remember who it was. Oh, it was a friend of Bill's from Florida. So we're walking around in that park, kind of at the base of that little hill in the park. And this lady comes up, there's two cops on horses that were kind of slowly ambling around. And the one lady sort of slowly ambles over near where we were. Ed Bunker, he didn't give a damn. He pulls out a joint and lights it, and she's coming right toward him, So she says to him, sir, you can't smoke that in public like that. And he said, oh, I didn't know that. So he's like, now he's starting to bust her balls a little bit. So I'm like, I hope this doesn't go on like this. So she says, sir, I want you to put that joint out. He said, you don't have the authority to tell me what to do and what not to do. So I'm sitting here, a little dude from Florida. I'm like, what the hell is going on here in this park? So she starts giving him some lip back. Well, the next thing you know, they're kind of giving each other some lip, but it's almost like playing. All of a sudden, she's not serious anymore. So he said, she's getting ready to leave. She says, well, I'm going to be back around here in about 20 minutes, and if you're still smoking, I'm going to have to take action. And I'm like, he's like, yeah, sure. If I'm working on this thing in 20 minutes, something happened. I probably had a heart attack. So anyway, she leaves, and then he starts yapping away at her. He says, and if you come back in 20 and you want to do something, you better be prepared to get off of that horse, because it ain't going to be easy. And he's like going at this. She's a full-blown Brooklyn cop. So she was gone. She left, and I'm sitting there like, I was like, Ed Bunker, I can't believe what you just did, man. He said, well, sometimes you got to give these cops some shit because they don't know what the hell they're doing. He said, what's she going to do? go through all the energy and rigmarole to bust me for a single joint in a public park. So I thought, well, I guess he's got a point. So anyway, that was the first time I'd never seen anything like that before, and I thought, that's wild, but I never have tried it since. I've never smoked pot, so it's not an issue for me. But anyway, so that was Fort Greene Park. Now here's the other interesting thing, and I'll close with this. Filmmaker Spike Lee, first sort of cult film. I wouldn't say it was a big film, but it became kind of big. Was She's Gotta Have It. I think that might have been.
That was a big enough film.
Would you call that a big film?
Yeah, I mean, kinda, sorta.
I would say, I don't even remember if it was his first independent film or if it was his graduate school film. But anyway, it kind of, it's a pretty rough and tumble independent film, but it's a cool story. And then, of course, I think his next big film was,
Do the Right Thing.
which one?
Do the Right Thing.
Do the Right Thing, yeah, which was a great film. Anyway, after She's Gotta Have It, he lived in this, somewhere within a half mile of here. But after She's Gotta Have It, he set up shop in a tiny little retail space about a block and a half down this way. And we knew it because it had his picture in it, and he had a film production company. I can't even remember the name of it. You'd know it if you.
It's about 40 mules.
That's it. 40 acres and a mule or something. Yeah, that was it. And so that was on the window, but it was pretty small. After Do the Right Thing came out, he moved from there down here about 3 blocks, closer to where his parents lived. His dad used to score his films. He was a jazz musician. He took over a much bigger space here. I mean, it was like a couple thousand square feet, and he had staff and everything at that point. He had, so we used to walk when we were just killing time like we are today on a spring day. We used to try to walk by his place hoping he'd be around because we wanted to meet him, but we never did meet him. But anyway, so that was the Spike Lee component in the neighborhood here, which was pretty, and I'm pretty sure he's still here. This is his old neighborhood.
Right, yep.
So anyway, you've been so good with the camera. You got any questions about this marvelous spot?
No, but it's cool that you've got such a great history with this area, because I don't know Brooklyn well at all.
Yeah, Brooklyn Heights it was nice, and it's still really nice, I'm sure. It's pretty cool. But this street still looks fantastic. It's a great spring day. I mean, it's the middle of April 2025, and we're just kind of killing time. So we're meeting a friend for dinner. But anyway, yeah, this is good for now. We're going to walk around and see what Brooklyn Academy of Music looks like. They were just kind of getting going when we were here, 40 years ago, but they're huge now. So we'll head up that way and see what the neighborhood looks like.
Okay.
Ciao, Mama. Oh, there is one more thing I neglected to mention I want to tell you. When we were in this number 2 here on South Oxford, there is a surviving black and white photo of me in this building. It's me sitting in a chair, and Mark and Bill are playing around with me. So they're like, Mark's got me behind the arms and he's pulling me back, and Bill, I think, is fake punching me in the stomach or something, or putting a gun to my stomach. So anyway, that photo does exist. We were all young and skinny, and upstairs we were actually right in that corner in that photo. So that was it. There is documentation of that, but that's it. There's no video, no other photos or anything. And by the way, Mark now lives in the south of France, so he and I send messages maybe once every 3 or 4 years. And Bill passed away about 5 or 6 years ago, so that's it. And I don't know whatever happened to Jill. She has, I think, gone back up to upstate New York. So anyway, that's that apartment.